I have watched soldiers testify with voices so steady that no one noticed their hands were shaking beneath the table. I have watched decorated men cry over things they survived 50 years earlier. I have watched people enter my courtroom believing age made a witness weak, memory made a witness useless, and silence meant there was nothing left to say. But I was not prepared for the morning an 85-year-old veteran slowly rolled up both sleeves in front of me and made my entire courtroom go silent. His name was Arthur Coleman. When he first entered my courtroom, nobody stared, nobody whispered, nobody pointed. He looked like many elderly men I had seen before, tall once, but slightly bent now, thin shoulders, a faded brown suit, a walking cane in his right hand, and a small canvas bag clutched tightly in his left. His shoes were polished, not new, polished. That matters. Some men stop caring about appearances when life becomes hard. Others polish their shoes because discipline is the last thing the world has not taken from them. Arthur was the second kind. Across from him sat a woman named Madison Reed, 41 years old, sharp blazer, perfect hair, perfect nails, perfect expression. She looked calm in the way people look calm when they have already decided the person across from them cannot possibly win. That kind of calm always makes me pay attention, because guilty people rarely enter court looking guilty. The smart ones enter looking offended. Before we go any further, make sure you have subscribed to this channel for more powerful courtroom stories like this one. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. Also, comment below and tell us where you are watching this video from. Now let me take you back to where this case truly began. At first glance, the case looked simple. Arthur Coleman claimed Madison Reed had taken nearly $12,000 from him after promising to coordinate repairs for his damaged roof, broken furnace, and flooded basement. Madison claimed Arthur was confused. There it was, that word, confused. It appeared in her answer. It appeared in her attorney's opening statement. It appeared in the tone she used before Arthur had even spoken. She said Arthur had donated the money voluntarily to our Veterans Outreach Group. She said he misunderstood the purpose of the payment. She said he was angry because he expected free work no organization had ever promised. And then her attorney went one step further. He said Arthur's age, grief, and health issues had affected his memory. I looked at Arthur when that was said. He did not react. He did not interrupt. He did not shake his head. He simply lowered his eyes and placed both hands over the canvas bag on his lap. His thumbs moved slowly across the fabric, back and forth, like a man feeling for something he was not yet ready to reveal. That caught my attention. People in court hold evidence differently. Some hold it like a weapon. Some hold it like a shield. Arthur held that bag like it contained pain. I asked Madison's attorney to sit down. Then I looked at Arthur. "Mr. Coleman," I said, "tell me what happened." He stood slowly. It took him a moment, not because he wanted sympathy, because his body no longer moved as quickly as his mind. His voice, when it came, was rough but steady. "I served in Korea, Your Honor." The courtroom grew quiet. "I came home in 1959. I worked 38 years at the railway yard. My wife, June, and I bought our house in 1964. He paused. "Same house I live in now." Madison glanced down at her phone, only for a second, but I saw it. A man was speaking about 60 years of his life, and she was already bored. "That told me more about her than any document could," Arthur continued. "June passed away 2 winters ago." His hand tightened around the edge of the canvas bag. "She used to complain about the old furnace. She said it sounded like a truck trying to climb a hill." A few people in the gallery smiled softly. Arthur smiled too, just barely. She was right. Then his smile disappeared. "After she died, the furnace stopped working. The roof started leaking over her sewing room, and the basement flooded when the spring rains came. I asked, "How did you meet Miss Reed?" He looked toward Madison. She didn't look back. "She came to my church." That answer changed the room, not because church made the case different legally, because it explained trust. She gave a talk after Sunday service. She said her organization helped elderly veterans stay in their homes. She had brochures. She had photographs. She had a table with little flags on it. His voice stayed steady. She said men like me had given enough. Madison's attorney shifted in his chair. Arthur continued. "She came to my house the next Tuesday. She looked at the roof. She looked at the furnace. She looked at the basement. She told me everything could be handled before winter. And you paid her?" "Yes, Your Honor." "How much?" $11,800. That number moved through the courtroom like a stone dropped in water. For Madison, maybe it was an invoice. For Arthur, it was something else. "How did you have that money?" I asked. Arthur's face changed, just slightly. "My wife saved it." "For what?" He looked down. "For a trip." "What trip?" His voice became quieter. "She always wanted to see the Grand Canyon. No one moved. We never went." He swallowed. "After she passed, I kept the money in the bank. I told myself maybe one day I'd go anyway." He looked at Madison for the first time. "But then the house started falling apart. And I thought June would want the house fixed." That is something people forget in court. Money is rarely just money. Sometimes it is a trip never taken, a promise never kept. A final piece of a life that no one else understands. Madison finally spoke. "Your Honor, that is touching, but it doesn't change the paperwork." There it was, touching. She said it like kindness was an inconvenience. I looked at her. "Mrs. Reed, you'll have your turn." She leaned back, still calm, still certain, still convinced Arthur's emotion would not survive her documents. Arthur reached into his canvas bag. His hands shook slightly, not enough for everyone to notice, enough for me. He pulled out 3 items: a brochure, a bank receipt, and a photograph. The photograph showed a small White House with blue shutters, a crooked porch railing, and an American flag mounted beside the door. The roof was sagging. The front steps were cracked. A row of flowers had been planted beneath the window. Arthur touched the photograph. "June planted those." "What kind of flowers?" "Marigolds." "Why marigolds?" He smiled faintly. She said they were stubborn. The gallery went completely quiet. She liked stubborn things. I looked at Madison. She wasn't smiling anymore, not because of the flowers. Because Arthur was becoming human in front of the room. That was dangerous for her. Her defense depended on making him look confused, old, forgetful, weak. But he was not weak. He was precise. He was quiet. And he was carrying something inside that canvas bag he had not shown us yet. Madison's attorney stood and began questioning him. His voice was polite. That made it worse. "Mr. Coleman, do you take medication?" "Yes, for memory problems." "No." "Have you ever forgotten appointments?" Arthur looked at him. "I'm 85. That wasn't my question." "Yes." "Have you ever misplaced important papers?" "Yes." "Have you ever misunderstood a conversation?" Arthur paused, then answered, "Probably." The attorney turned slightly toward me, as if he had already proven his point. But Arthur wasn't finished. "I have forgotten where I put my glasses. I have forgotten why I walked into a room. I have forgotten names of men I served besides 60 years ago." He looked directly at Madison. "But I remember the woman who came to my house and put her hand on my shoulder while I cried in my kitchen." The courtroom went still. "I remember her telling me June would be proud of me for accepting help." Madison's face hardened, Arthur continued. "And I remember what she said when I asked for my money back." I leaned forward. "What did she say?" Arthur's hand moved to his left sleeve. He touched the cuff once. Then again Madison saw it. Her posture changed, just slightly. But enough. Arthur did not answer immediately. He looked at me the way some witnesses do when the truth is larger than their courage. Then he whispered, "She told me nobody believes old men who live alone." The room changed, not loudly, not dramatically, but something moved through every person sitting there, because that was not the language of a misunderstanding. That was the language of a threat. I asked, "Did she threaten you, Mr. Coleman?" He looked at Madison, then at the canvas bag, then back at me. "She told me to let it go. And if you didn't—" He began unbuttoning his left sleeve, slowly, carefully. The bailiff took one step forward. Madison's attorney stood. "Your Honor, we object to any undisclosed theatrics." I looked at him. "Sit down." Arthur's fingers trembled against the button, one button, then the next. The entire courtroom watched. Madison leaned forward before she could stop herself. That was when I knew. She knew what was coming. Arthur rolled the sleeve halfway up, then stopped. His voice dropped so low the microphone barely caught it. I didn't want to show anyone. No one breathed. He rolled the sleeve higher. The first thing I saw was old bruising near the wrist, not fresh, yellowed, faded, but unmistakable, the shape of fingers. The courtroom inhaled together. Madison whispered something to her attorney. He didn't answer. Arthur turned his arm slightly. And that was when the second mark became visible, not a bruise, writing faded blue ink across his forearm, uneven, shaky. Written by the hand of someone who feared forgetting something too important to lose. It said Madison Reed, back porch, 8:46 p.m. For a moment, I did not speak. Neither did the attorneys. Neither did Madison. Arthur looked ashamed. That is what stayed with me. Not angry, not proud, ashamed, as if showing the mark hurt more than receiving it. I asked quietly, "Mr. Coleman, why did you write that on your arm?" He looked down at the floor. "Because my wife always told me if something matters, write it where you can't lose it." The room went completely silent. Madison's calm had cracked. Her perfect posture was gone. Her eyes stayed fixed on Arthur's arm like she could make the ink disappear by staring hard enough. But ink is stubborn, so is truth. And in that moment, I understood something that made the back of my neck go cold. This was no longer an elderly veteran suing over a repair deposit. Something had happened on Arthur Coleman's back porch at 8:46 p.m. Something Madison Reed desperately hoped this courtroom would never see. And judging by the way Arthur's right hand was still gripping that canvas bag, I had a terrible feeling the arm was not the only evidence he had brought with him. For several long seconds, no one in the courtroom moved. Arthur Coleman remained standing with his sleeve rolled halfway up, his weathered arm exposed for everyone to see, the faded ink, the yellowing bruises, the trembling hand that refused to lower itself. I have watched people fake injuries before. I have watched them exaggerate pain. I have watched them invent stories hoping sympathy would succeed where evidence could not. This was not one of those moments. Arthur wasn't asking anyone to feel sorry for him. He looked as though he wished he had never needed to show his arm at all. That matters, because people seeking attention usually display their wounds. People carrying real shame try to hide them. Madison Reed finally found her voice. "Your Honor, that proves absolutely nothing." Her attorney immediately stood beside her. The writing could have been placed there at any time. The bruises could have come from anywhere. I nodded. "You're correct. Neither one of them expected that answer," I continued. "Standing alone, the bruises prove very little. The writing by itself proves very little. But this court never evaluates evidence one piece at a time. It evaluates patterns." Madison's confidence returned for just a moment. She believed there was no pattern. She was wrong. I turned back toward Arthur. Mr. Coleman, tell me what happened at 8:46 that evening. Arthur closed his eyes, not dramatically, slowly, like a man reopening a door he had spent months trying to keep shut. I called her. Why? Because winter was coming. My roof still leaked. My furnace still didn't work. My basement still smelled like mold. And she answered. What did she say? Arthur looked toward Madison. She told me she'd stop by. Did she? Yes. What time? Around sunset. The courtroom remained silent. Arthur continued. She walked around the house. She didn't bring workers. She didn't bring tools. She came alone. Madison shook her head. None of that happened. Arthur didn't even look at her. She told me the money was gone. What did you say? I told her it was all I had. And then Arthur's hand slowly tightened into a fist. I started crying. No one interrupted. No one coughed. Even Madison's attorney stopped writing. Arthur continued. I wasn't crying about the money. I was crying because his voice cracked. Because June trusted people. I always told her the world was changing, but she believed people still kept their word. He looked down at the photograph of the little White House. I realized I'd spent the money she worked 40 years to save on someone who never intended to help us. The gallery remained perfectly still. Madison crossed her arms. Her posture had changed. Defensive. Not confident. Defensive, I asked quietly. What happened after you cried? Arthur hesitated, then answered. She grabbed my arm. Madison immediately stood. That's a lie. Arthur flinched. Not because she interrupted, because she raised her voice. That tiny reaction told me something. People who have lived through intimidation often react long after the danger has passed. I looked directly at Madison. Sit down. She remained standing. I never touched him. Sit. This time, she obeyed. Arthur continued. I tried closing the back door. She put her hand here. He gently touched the bruises, and she leaned close enough that nobody else could hear. What did she say? Arthur swallowed, then repeated the words exactly. Arthur, you're 85. You live alone. No jury is going to believe you over me. The courtroom became absolutely silent. Those weren't the words of someone discussing a contract. Those were the words of someone measuring power. Arthur continued. I told her I'd go to court. What did she say? Go ahead. By the time anyone believes you perjurian, you'll probably forget my name. For the first time that morning, Madison's attorney didn't object. He simply stared at his client. I noticed it immediately. Good attorneys object to damaging testimony. Great attorneys stop objecting when they realize their client may actually have said it. Arthur slowly lowered his eyes. I believed her. What do you mean? I stayed home. For how long? Almost 4 months. Why? Because I started wondering, what if she was right? His voice became quieter. What if people really don't believe old men anymore? That sentence settled over the courtroom like a heavy blanket. Not because it was dramatic, because it was believable. Loneliness changes the way people think, especially after grief, especially after 85 years. I asked him, so what changed your mind? Arthur reached into the canvas bag. The movement was careful, almost protective. He removed a small spiral notebook, blue cover, bent corners, the kind sold in every grocery store. He held it with both hands. My wife bought this. What is it? Our memory book. The courtroom leaned forward. Arthur smiled faintly. When we got older, June worried we'd start forgetting things. So every evening, we wrote one important thing that happened that day. The smile disappeared. After she died, I kept writing. I looked at the notebook. It wasn't evidence yet. It was something much heavier, a marriage bound together by paper. Arthur opened to the final written page. The handwriting was uneven. His handwriting. He looked at me. May I read it? You may. His voice trembled. October 17, Madison came tonight. She said nobody would believe me. June, he stopped reading. His lips began shaking. I waited. The courtroom waited. Finally, he continued. June, I hope I'm remembering this right. There wasn't a dry eye in the gallery, not because of the lawsuit, because of the last sentence. A man wasn't writing notes anymore. He was writing to the wife he had already buried. Arthur quietly closed the notebook. I wrote on my arm because I was afraid I'd forget. I wrote in the notebook because I was afraid I'd remember wrong. I have presided over thousands of hearings. Very few witnesses have ever explained memory with more honesty than that. He wasn't pretending to remember everything. He was documenting what he feared losing. Madison suddenly leaned toward her attorney. She whispered rapidly. He looked surprised, then concerned. Then he slowly turned toward me. Your Honor, I would request a brief recess to speak with my client. Interesting. Very interesting. An hour earlier, they wanted this case heard immediately. Now, they wanted time. Time is something people often ask for when the truth arrives faster than their defense. I looked at Arthur. His sleeve was still rolled up. His notebook still rested in his hands. His canvas bag remained open beside him, and tucked inside, just barely visible beneath a folded veteran's cap, I noticed the corner of what looked like a small flash drive. Arthur quickly pushed it back into the bag. Too late. I had already seen it. Whatever was on that drive made him protect it even more carefully than the notebook. And something told me the writing on his arm was only the beginning. The request for a recess told me more than any argument had all morning. Good attorneys ask for time when they discover new evidence. Great attorneys ask for time when they discover new problems. I looked at Madison's attorney. Request denied. He looked surprised. Your Honor, I simply need... No, this witness has waited 4 months. He has waited long enough. The courtroom became quiet again. Arthur Coleman slowly closed the blue notebook and placed it back inside the canvas bag. His movements were careful, deliberate, almost protective. Then he zipped the bag halfway shut, not all the way, halfway, as though he knew something inside would soon have to come out. That caught my attention. I looked toward Madison. She no longer appeared confident. She wasn't angry either. She was calculating, watching Arthur's bag, not Arthur the bag. That mattered. People don't watch a canvas bag unless they believe it contains something dangerous. I asked Arthur one simple question. Mr. Coleman, you mentioned Miss Reed came to your house that evening. Yes. Was anyone else there? He nodded. For a few minutes. Who? My neighbor? The room shifted. I looked down at my notes. You have a witness? Arthur shook his head. No, what do you mean? He didn't stay. His name is Walter Jenkins. He was walking his dog. He waved. I waved back. Then he kept walking, so he never heard the conversation. No, but Arthur hesitated. He saw her car. Madison immediately interrupted. So what? I visited his home. I've never denied that. Interesting. Very interesting. She admitted being there without being asked twice. That meant she had already accepted one part of Arthur's story. The question was, how much more would she have to admit before the day was over? I turned back toward Arthur. When your neighbor left, what happened? Arthur's eyes drifted toward the courtroom floor. I asked her again. Please, just give me enough back to fix the furnace. What did she say? It's too late. The money belongs to the foundation now. Then, Arthur slowly rubbed the bruise on his wrist. I reached for the door. She grabbed me. The courtroom remained perfectly still. Hard? He nodded. Very. What happened next? Arthur looked embarrassed again. That emotion stayed with me. Real victims often carry shame that doesn't belong to them. I started apologizing. You apologized. Yes. For what? For making her angry. No one spoke, not even Madison's attorney. Arthur continued quietly. My wife used to tell me, Arthur, never apologize when someone hurts you. I forgot that. His voice cracked. For a little while, I forgot. The gallery remained silent. I looked toward Madison. She was staring at the table, not because she felt guilty, because she knew exactly what came next. I could see it. Years on the bench teach you that people often remember evidence before it appears. Arthur reached back into the canvas bag. This time, he removed something wrapped inside an old white towel. He held it with both hands, not because it was heavy, because it was precious. Madison's breathing changed small, quick, almost impossible to notice. But I noticed. I asked gently, what is that? Arthur didn't answer immediately. Instead, he carefully unfolded the towel lot by layer. The courtroom leaned forward. Inside was an old flip phone. Not a smartphone, not expensive. One of those simple phones with physical buttons, the kind many elderly people still prefer. Madison's attorney smiled, almost with relief. Your Honor, surely we're not about to spend time discussing a cell phone. Arthur quietly looked at him, then said something that changed the room. It wasn't for calling, silence. It was for recording. Every person in the courtroom turned toward the phone. Madison stopped breathing for just a fraction of a second. I saw it, Arthur continued. My grandson bought it. He programmed one button, just one. Why? In case somebody ever scares you, he said. The courtroom remained absolutely still. Arthur looked down at the phone. I forgot I even had it. Then he looked at me. Until I found it inside my kitchen drawer. When? Last month. What did you find? My grandson checked it. And Arthur swallowed hard. It had recorded something. Madison's attorney immediately stood. Your Honor, we object. We have never received any recording. I nodded. Neither have I. I looked toward Arthur. Do you have the recording with you? He nodded slowly. Yes. In the phone? No. He reached into the canvas bag once more, then removed the small flash drive I had noticed earlier, the same one he had quickly hidden. The courtroom became completely silent. Arthur held it between two trembling fingers. My grandson copied it here because he was afraid I'd lose the phone, Madison whispered. No. So quietly that only the front row heard her. Arthur looked at her, not angrily, sadly. I didn't even know it recorded. I only pressed the red button because my grandson told me to whenever I felt unsafe. The courtroom froze. I looked directly at Madison. She wasn't watching Arthur anymore. She wasn't watching the phone. She wasn't even watching the flash drive. She was watching the bailiff walking toward Arthur to collect it, because suddenly, whatever confidence she had walked into my courtroom with was disappearing one careful step at a time. And before anyone said another word, I had one unmistakable thought. Arthur Coleman hadn't written Madison Reed's name on his arm because it was his only evidence. He wrote it there because he never imagined the little phone in his kitchen had quietly remembered everything he was afraid he might forget. The moment the bailiff placed the flash drive on my bench, the entire courtroom changed. I have seen people panic before. Usually it happens after evidence is played. This time, Madison Reed panicked before anyone had heard a single second. That interested me, because innocent people fear being misunderstood. Guilty people fear being remembered. I looked toward her attorney. Have you ever seen this recording? No, Your Honor. He sounded honest, actually honest. That mattered. Sometimes attorneys are deceived by their own clients. Sometimes they discover the truth at the same moment the court does. I turned toward Arthur. Mr. Coleman, did you know your phone was recording that evening? He slowly shook his head. No. When did you find out? My grandson came over to help fix my television. And he noticed the phone. He asked why the recording light had stayed on. Arthur looked embarrassed. I thought I'd broken it. A few people smiled softly. Arthur continued. He listened. What happened? He started crying. The courtroom became perfectly still. He asked me, Grandpa, why didn't you tell anyone? Arthur lowered his eyes. I told him nobody would have believed me anyway. No one moved, not even Madison. Then I looked toward the courtroom clerk. Play the recording. The flash drive was connected. For 2 seconds, nothing, only static. Madison slowly exhaled too early. Then Arthur's voice, weak, tired. Please, it's all I have. The courtroom remained silent. Then another voice, Madison's, clear, calm, cold. You signed the paperwork, Arthur answered. You said it wasn't a donation. I trusted you. Madison laughed, not loudly, the kind of laugh people use when they believe they've already won. Trust doesn't change contracts. Arthur's breathing became heavier. Then came the sentence that made several people in the gallery look at one another. If my wife were alive, she'd know what to do, Madison answered immediately. Your wife is dead, Arthur. The courtroom froze. No one breathed. Arthur whispered, Please don't say that. Then we heard footsteps, a door, the unmistakable sound of someone moving closer. Madison again. You need to stop calling me. You need to stop embarrassing yourself. No one is going to believe an old man living alone. Arthur's breathing became shaky. Then a sharp sound. Not loud, short, like a hand grabbing someone's sleeve. Arthur gasped. The recording captured everything. His voice, her voice, even the struggle. Arthur quietly saying, You're hurting me. Then Madison's reply, So what? The courtroom erupted. Several people gasped. Someone in the back whispered, Oh my God. The bailiff immediately called for silence. Madison's attorney had completely stopped writing. He wasn't taking notes anymore. He was listening, like everyone else. Then came the sentence, the one Arthur had written on his arm. The recording captured it perfectly. Go to court if you want. They'll think you're confused. They'll think you're lonely. They'll think you're forgetting things. Arthur's voice trembled. I'm writing this down. Madison laughed again. Write whatever you want. No one's going to believe you. The recording ended. Silence, Dab Besettel's silence. I have presided over countless hearings. Very few pieces of evidence have ever changed a courtroom so completely, not because they were dramatic, because they were impossible to misunderstand. I slowly looked toward Madison. She wasn't crying. She wasn't angry. She simply stared at the defense table, as though the last 4 months had just collapsed in front of her. I asked quietly, Mrs. Reed, is that your voice? Her attorney answered first. We request a forensic examination. I nodded. That can certainly happen. Then I looked back at Madison. I didn't ask your attorney. I asked you. She remained silent for nearly 10 seconds. Finally, she whispered, Yes. No explanation, no excuse. Just one word, yes. The courtroom remained frozen, but something still bothered me. One recording proved intimidation. It proved pressure. It proved Arthur was telling the truth. Yet, something about Madison's confidence from the beginning of this case still didn't make sense. People don't walk into court this confidently unless they've done it before. I looked at Arthur. Mr. Coleman, when you met Ms. Reed, did she ever tell you how many veterans her organization had helped? Arthur nodded. She said, Hundreds. Interesting. I turned toward Madison. Mrs. Reed, how many elderly veterans received donations through your organization last year? She didn't answer. I asked again. How many? Her attorney quietly closed his folder. He didn't even attempt to object. That told me everything. Then the courtroom doors opened. My clerk walked quickly toward the bench, carrying a thin stack of printed documents She handed them to me without saying a word. Across the top of the first page were 5 words. Asterisk, Veterans Assistance Complaint Records. I turned the first page, then the second, then the third. My stomach tightened. Arthur Coleman wasn't the first. He wasn't even the second. His name was one of 7. 7 elderly veterans, all over 80, all living alone, all widowers. All had paid Madison Reed. All claimed they were promised emergency home repairs. None of those repairs had ever been completed. I slowly looked up, then directly at Madison. For the first time since this hearing began, she didn't look like a confident charity director. She looked like someone who had just realized Arthur Coleman had never been her real problem. The real problem was that he had finally given 6 other forgotten veterans the courage to speak. The complaint records remained open on my bench. 7 names, 7 elderly veterans, 7 nearly identical stories. I looked at Arthur Coleman. He was no longer standing alone. He simply hadn't known it yet. The courtroom remained perfectly silent. I picked up the first complaint. 83 years old, widower, promised emergency roof repairs, paid in full. No work completed. The second, 81 years old, former Marine, promised wheelchair ramp, money collected, contractor never arrived. The third, 87, living alone. Foundation repair, $12,000, case closed after victim refused to testify. I slowly closed the file, then looked directly at Madison Reed. Mrs. Reed, would you like to explain why every complainant shares the same pattern? She stared straight ahead. No answer. Her attorney finally stood. His voice no longer carried the confidence it had at the beginning of the hearing. Your Honor, my client wishes to invoke her rights regarding any matters that could expose her to criminal liability. There it was. The courtroom understood immediately. An hour earlier, this had been a disagreement over a payment. Now, even her own attorney believed criminal exposure was possible. I turned back toward Arthur. Mr. Coleman, did you know any of these men? He slowly shook his head. No, I thought I was the only fool. That sentence struck the room harder than anyone expected, not because it was dramatic, because it was honest. Loneliness convinces people their suffering is unique. Predators depend on that belief. I asked Arthur one more question. Why didn't you report this sooner? He lowered his eyes. I was embarrassed. Why? I fought in Korea. I buried friends. I raised a family. I fixed locomotives for almost 40 years. Then his voice cracked, and somehow I let someone convince me I was too old to know when I was being lied to. No one interrupted him. I thought, if my grandson found out, he'd think I was weak. The gallery remained silent. One elderly man in the back quietly wiped his eyes. Arthur continued. But he didn't. What did he say? Arthur smiled for the first time that morning. He said, Grandpa, being tricked doesn't make you weak. Keeping quiet is what helps people like her. I looked toward Madison. She was no longer watching Arthur. She was staring at the complaint records, 7 names, 7 lives, 7 opportunities she believed would never meet one another. Then the courtroom clerk hurried toward my bench once again. Your Honor, we've just received a response from the Secretary of State. I accepted the document. It confirmed exactly what I feared. Madison's so-called Veterans Foundation had existed for less than 8 months. Its registered office wasn't a community center. It wasn't a charity building. It wasn't even an office. It was a rented mailbox. The courtroom murmured. Then came the final page. Bank records, deposits, withdrawals, transfers. Next to every veteran's payment, money had been transferred into one personal account, Madison Reed. Not the foundation, not emergency contractors, not repair services. Her personal account. I slowly placed the records beside Arthur's notebook, then asked one final question. Mrs. Reed, would you still like this court to believe these were charitable donations? Silence. Her attorney leaned toward her, whispered something. She slowly nodded, then stood. For the first time all day, there was no confidence left in her voice. I never meant for it to become this, I interrupted gently. It became this the first time you accepted money from a man who trusted you more than he trusted himself. She lowered her head. I told myself I would pay them back. When? When the organization became successful, but it never did. She didn't answer because she couldn't. Then I looked at Arthur. He was still holding the blue notebook, still holding the photograph of his little White House, still holding on to the last promise he had made to June. I asked him quietly, Mr. Coleman, if June were sitting beside you today, what do you think she'd say? Arthur laughed softly through his tears, not because anything was funny, because he could almost hear her voice. She'd probably tell me, Arthur, you always were too trusting. A few gentle smiles appeared across the courtroom. Then he looked toward Madison. But she'd also tell me, never let one dishonest person make you stop believing in good people. The room fell silent again. That sentence stayed with me because after everything Arthur had lost, he still refused to let bitterness become the last chapter of his life. I looked at Madison one final time. Her shoulders had collapsed. The perfect posture, the perfect confidence, the perfect smile, all gone. She hadn't been defeated by a lawyer. She hadn't been defeated by a contract. She had been defeated by an 85-year-old veteran who refused to let fear erase the truth. I entered judgment. Judgment is entered for Mr. Arthur Coleman. I award full restitution of $11,800. I further award compensatory and punitive damages. I also order that today's evidence, including the audio recording, financial records, complaint history, and organizational documents, be immediately forwarded to the appropriate law enforcement and regulatory authorities. My gavel struck once. The sound echoed through the courtroom. The civil case was over. But everyone in that room understood Madison Reed's legal troubles had only just begun. The courtroom remained silent long after my gavel struck. No one reached for the door. No one gathered their belongings. It was as if every person in that room understood they had just witnessed something far larger than a lawsuit over home repairs. Arthur Coleman stood exactly where he had been standing all morning. His sleeve was still rolled halfway up. The faded blue ink was still visible across his forearm. The bruises had not disappeared. Neither had the shame he had carried into my courtroom. I looked at him. Mr. Coleman, you may lower your sleeve. He nodded slowly. As he buttoned the cuff, his fingers trembled. Not because he was afraid anymore, because the fight was finally over. For the first time that day, he no longer had to prove he remembered. He no longer had to prove he wasn't confused. He no longer had to prove he deserved to be believed. The courtroom had already done that for him. I turned toward Madison Reed. She remained seated. Her attorney had quietly closed every folder on the defense table. The thick stack of paperwork that had looked so powerful that morning now seemed strangely unimportant, because paper can explain a transaction. It cannot erase a recording. It cannot erase bruises. It cannot erase the truth. The bailiff stepped beside Madison's. She looked at me for one last time, not with anger, not with confidence, with disbelief. I never thought he'd keep evidence. Arthur answered before I could. I didn't. She looked confused. Arthur gently lifted the little blue notebook. My wife did. The room became silent again. Arthur smiled through tired eyes. June spent 40 years teaching me one lesson. If something matters, Pridgen, write it down. I thought she meant grocery lists. A few quiet smiles appeared around the courtroom. Arthur continued. But after she died, I realized she was teaching me something much bigger. She was teaching me not to let important moments disappear. He looked toward the notebook, then toward his arm. So when I became scared, I wrote. When I became confused, I wrote. When I thought nobody would believe me, I wrote. Then he looked directly at Madison. And when you told me no one would remember, I wrote your name where I couldn't lose it. No one spoke. Because every person in that courtroom understood the weight of those words. I asked Arthur one final question. Mr. Coleman, if June could see you today, what do you think she'd say? He laughed quietly, the kind of laugh that comes through tears. She'd tell me I finally listened. The gallery smiled. Arthur looked toward the photograph of the little white house. The roof will finally get fixed. The furnace, too. He paused, then added softly, and maybe I'll still take that trip. I looked at him. What trip? The Grand Canyon. My wife waited 50 years. I suppose I've already made her wait long enough. Several people quietly wiped away tears. Even one of the deputies standing near the courtroom doors looked away for a moment. I turned back toward Madison. Mrs. Reed, you built your defense on one belief. She slowly raised her head. You believed Mr. Coleman would be too embarrassed to speak. She said nothing. You believed he would be too old to remember. Still nothing. You believed he would be too lonely to fight. Silence. But you made one mistake. I looked toward Arthur. You confused kindness with weakness. The courtroom remained perfectly still. Then I added the words I knew everyone in that room would remember. Predators often spend years studying vulnerable people. They study grief, they study loneliness, they study age, they study trust, but they almost always overlook one thing: courage. Arthur Coleman had walked into my courtroom with an old canvas bag, a faded notebook, a broken heart, and one sentence written on his arm. Madison Reed had walked in with contracts, brochures, lawyers, and confidence. Only one of them walked out with the truth. As Arthur slowly picked up the canvas bag, he reached inside one last time. He removed the photograph of his little white house. He looked at it for several seconds, then smiled. June, we finally did it. He slipped the photograph back into the bag, placed the blue notebook beside it, and carefully buttoned the last button on his sleeve. The ink disappeared beneath the fabric, but its purpose had already been fulfilled. I watched him leave the courtroom with the same slow steps he had entered with, the same polished shoes, the same worn canvas bag, the same quiet dignity. The only difference was that he no longer walked like a man carrying shame. He walked like a soldier who had finally laid down a burden he had carried alone for far too long. I have presided over countless cases during my career. Many involved more money than Arthur Coleman would ever see. Many involved bigger companies, more famous people, more expensive lawyers. Yet very few stayed with me the way this one did. Because this case reminded me of something every courtroom eventually learns. Justice does not always begin with fingerprints or contracts or surveillance cameras. Sometimes justice begins with an elderly veteran who refuses to let fear become his final memory. People often ask me what the strongest evidence is. They expect me to say video or DNA or financial records. Sometimes they're right, but not that day. That day, the strongest evidence in my courtroom wasn't the recording. It wasn't the complaint files. It wasn't the bank transfers. It was an 85-year-old veteran who believed he might forget the truth, so he carried it on his own skin until someone was finally willing to listen. And that is something no amount of money can ever silence.